Today's lecture is the latest in the law school Stranahan National Issues Forum. This forum was initiated in the fall of 1990 through an endowment from the Stranahan Foundation as a joint program of the College of Law and the college's Federalist Society. The forum is designed to address issues of national importance through the lens of the American legal system and is one of our major lectureships. Over 40 of the nation's leading legal academics, economists, historians, political scientists, judges, philosophers, and public policy professionals have participated in the forum. Today's speaker, Christina Hoff Sommers, is a worthy addition to our list of Stranahan speakers, and I look forward to her talk with interest. To introduce, before I get to the introducer of today's speaker, I want to mention that this is obviously, and many of you know this, one of a number of lectureships and public programs we put on each semester. On Monday, in a week and a half, March 26th, we will host the Canon Lecture, one of our other lectureships, featuring Professor Tanya Hernandez of Fordham Law School. I welcome you to join us at this and other free events, which are listed on our website. To introduce Dr. Sommers, it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to Professor Lee Strang. As many of you know, Professor Strang teaches constitutional law, property, administrative law, and constitutional interpretation. A prolific scholar, Professor Strang is published in the fields of constitutional law and interpretation, religion and the First Amendment, and is currently editing a casebook on constitutional law. Professor Strang is the faculty advisor to the Federalist Society, co-sponsor of today's event. I especially thank him for taking time away from his sabbatical this semester to help organize and introduce today's talk. Please join me in welcoming Professor Strang.
Thank you, Dean Steinbach. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce this spring Stranahan lecture, Dr. Christina Hoff Sommers. In a series of books, most prominently Who Stole Feminism and the War with Boys, and in numerous articles and debates, Dr. Sommers described the liberal feminist orthodoxy that reigns in the media and on college campuses. This feminist orthodoxy, Dr. Sommers contends, has three main components: negative views about men, reliance on weak or false empirical claims, and a commitment to the view that men and women are essentially the same. Our own Women's Studies Department fits this profile. For example, the department's suggested student resources are uniformly slanted in a liberal direction, with references to Mother Jones, Planned Parenthood, NOW, and other similar organizations. In her Stranahan lecture today, Dr. Sommers, who is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute and holds a PhD from Brandeis University, challenges and critiques this feminist orthodoxy. Dr. Sommers proposes an alternative conception of feminism, one that embraces women's choices, including choices that aren't very popular at women's studies departments. Dr. Sommers will speak for approximately 45 minutes with time for questions and answers thereafter. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sommers.
Thank you. Kind introduction. I'm organizing myself here. I'm going to set my timer on my cell phone to make sure I don't go over and annoy the audience by carrying on for too long. For the past 2 decades, I have devoted myself to studying the influence of feminism on American culture, and I've had a special focus on campus feminism. And in the next 40 minutes, precisely, I will try to give you the best information I can on this topic of feminism, especially academic feminism. But of course, information is never the whole story. I have a point of view, and I will tell you about that as well. This afternoon, I am going to argue that contemporary feminism has taken a wrong turn. It is my view that the noble cause of women's emancipation has been harmed by the contemporary women's movement. Just one example that I discovered as a philosophy professor of many years, I would ask my students, how many of you are feminists? And almost no one would raise a hand. And we have good research from the Gallup poll showing that about 75% of American women sort of keep their distance. They don't identify with feminism. And how did something that's one of the great achievements of American society is the liberation of women, how did it become so marginalized in American culture? Just to begin with, I want to tell you a few things about myself. In the early 90s, I was a feminist in good standing. My classes were cross-listed with women's studies, my philosophy classes at Clark University. I was invited to referee articles for feminist journals, and generally accepted among my peers in feminist theory. All of that changed in 1994 when I published a book called Who Stole Feminism? Now, I hasten to say that book, in my humble opinion, was strongly feminist. However, I rejected the idea that American women were an oppressed class. I took strong exception to using language like male hegemony or patriarchal capitalist oppressor, that sort of thing. Just seemed to me to be absurd. By the 1990s, I argued American women were among the freest and most liberated in the world, certainly in history, and that it was no longer reasonable to speak of us as if we were a member of a subordinate class. Were there still inequities? Of course, and there's still, to this day, pockets of reaction. But overall, I argued that to speak of American society as a patriarchy, to refer to American women as second-class citizens, was simply wrong. In the book, I tried to show that the movement had been hijacked by gender war eccentrics, and I do mean eccentric. I think this may have changed. There may not be the colorful theorists that I encountered in the 90s, it may not be that way today, but just to give you an example, just a flavor of what I encountered, I had a colleague in feminist philosophy who had changed the name of her seminars to ovulars. And she didn't like the word seminar, the root word being associated with the very essence of male power, and she changed it to its feminist equivalent, as she saw it. Now it is funny that she did that. It was amusing, but the more I read in her articles and her book, she actually edited a textbook on feminist theory, I realized she wasn't kidding, that there was a seriousness behind this, which was very odd. When my book was first published, I did get some fan mail, not very much, though, from feminists. I was subjected to a colorful array of attacks for my heresies, and I'm not the only one. Around the time I wrote my book, I have wonderful compatriots like Camille Paglia, who's one of my favorite feminist dissidents, and Daphne Patai at the University of Massachusetts, Noretta Kourtka, University of Indiana, Jean Beth Elstein. There's a long list of us who have been skeptical, who have spoken against what we saw is the rigidity of organized feminist movement and women's studies. And in all cases, we would be subject to a colorful array of attacks for being, in my case, I was called a backlasher, a traitor to my gender, anti-woman. One angry critic actually referred to Christina Hoff Sommers and Margaret Thatcher, those two female impersonators. Well, I'm not a backlasher, a traitor. I'm certainly not an anti-woman or a female impersonator. What I am is a philosophy professor of many years. I'm now at a think tank in Washington, D.C., but for 20 years I taught philosophy. And I have a great respect for logic, clear thinking, rules of evidence, basic fairness, I hope. And I believe that bias in favor of logic and reason and fairness is what put me at odds with the feminist establishment. Now, I realize that sounds a little harsh, but I'm going to try to back it up. Now, I am not here, and by the way, in the end, I'm going to offer an olive branch to those I criticize, so it will seem very critical for a while, and then I'll take a turn towards harmony. I am not here to tell anyone to reject classical feminism of the sort that brought women the vote, that brought us educational opportunities and the many freedoms many of us take for granted. I am a passionate supporter of that style of feminism, which I call equity feminism or fairness feminism. Actually, I'm looking for a better name for it. If you have one, let me know. An equity feminist or a fairness feminist is someone who wants for women what she wants for everyone. It's sort of fair treatment, respect, dignity. Equity feminism, I believe, promises harmony and goodwill between the sexes. It views marriage between men and women as they complement one another. Women aren't subordinate to men. There's a complementarity. I believe that this kind of feminism will make us a much saner and happier world. There's nothing new about equity feminism. It started in the 18th century. It was grounded in the European Enlightenment, and it's what inspired the first wave in the 19th century, which gave women the vote, and it informed the second wave, which secured many other necessary freedoms and opportunities. Now, as a group, I believe that American women are flourishing, as I said, in unprecedented ways. We certainly don't look like an oppressed class. It would be the first oppressed class that is better educated than its oppressor, lives longer, has more life choices. Are things perfect for women? No, they are not. And we could all go through a long litany of things that are wrong and could be better. But so could men. For every problem you can cite for women, there's a comparable problem for men. People tend to think of the elite men, the CEOs of Fortune 500s. That's 500 men. Okay, there are millions of men who their prospects of being a CEO of a Fortune 500 are so dim. Their prospects of graduating from high school, that's where we're seeing a huge gap with women moving ahead, and certainly the prospects of going to college are much dimmer for men than women right now. We do a better job educating young women than young men in this society. The fact is, the major battles for women's freedom and equality, the major battles have been fought and won. And yes, women are still struggling. We're struggling to balance work and home life. We still have a very misogynistic popular culture. I would say the popular culture is also misandrist, to use anti-male. A lot of the time, but it's with women that takes on a special viciousness that is distressing. It's still certainly an issue. We also have what is referred to as the feminization of poverty. Women and children, by one of the largest cohorts of people living under the poverty line are women with children. That's a vexing problem we haven't solved. For the most part, the work of equity feminism in the 21st century lies outside this country, in countries where women are truly oppressed. There are parts of the world, especially in Africa and the Middle East, where women have not yet had so much as a ripple of freedom, let alone two major waves of liberation. So what I believe is that the liberation of women in the developing world is going to be the great human rights struggle of our age. And just as sort of the 20th century, we had to fight fascism and communism. In the 19th century, we fought slavery and had abolition movement. I think the 21st century is this century of women, and that means taking the rights we take for granted in the United States and forming common cause with women who are struggling. There are Gandhis and Nelson Mandela's women versions in countries around the world, and they are asking for our help, and I feel that is the great challenge to 21st century feminism, to reach out and offer that help. Now, some of you may be wondering, well, she sounds sort of feminist. I mean, how can her or her friends, Camille Paglia, Daphne Patai, Noretta Kotka, Elizabeth, all the other people I listed as equity feminists, why does that arouse so much opposition? I will explain. If you have had a feminist speaker on your campus, or you go to one of the websites of a major women's studies, of a major women's organization, the National Organization for Women, or the American Association of University Women, and so forth, or if you just visit the websites of most, not all, your school could be an exception, although probably not, the website of most women's studies departments, you're not going to find celebrations of equity feminism. You're not going to find expressions of gratitude about what we have achieved and how we have to reach to our struggling sisters across the globe. You're most likely to encounter a very different style of feminism, which I call gender feminism. The dominant philosophy of the organized women's movement is gender feminism, or victim feminism is another possible expression. So when I criticize feminism, it is gender feminism that I am objecting to. Now, what is gender feminism? Well, many of my colleagues in feminist philosophy and also in other fields, sociology and so forth, they refer to what they call the sex-gender system. In other words, they have discovered a pervasive system by which men oppress women. And as they view the matter, it's not enough to simply pass a few laws, make some reforms, or as some of them put it, you can't just add a few women and stir. You're not going to liberate women until there is systemic, fundamental, radical, revolutionary change. And one very succinct way of describing the sex-gender system was done by Sandra Bartke at University of Southern Illinois. She said, the sex-gender system is that system whereby, let me get her words exactly, she said, whereby, it's a system whereby we're all born bisexual, and then we are transformed into male and female gendered personalities, one destined to command, the other to obey. So we're all born bisexual, and then through social construction, we are manufactured female, they transform us into female. By giving little girls toys and influencing them, you get the female model, and then you get the masculine. One destined to command, the other to obey. I once read that definition to my husband, and he said, now, which one commands and which obeys? But never mind that. Now, gender feminism views every institution in the society has in their view, the gender feminists think that all institutions bear the impress of patriarchy. Literature, philosophy, music, language, science. And as I said, it's not enough to reform. You must radically transform. Now, this movement, gender feminism, did not develop out of the European Enlightenment. It is not, about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It grew out of the radical politics of Karl Marx and his modern-day heirs, and Herbert Marcuse, Franz Fanon, Michel Foucault. Now, if you've seen a play like The Vagina Monologues by Eve Ensler, how many have seen that play? How many have acted in that play? Oh, somebody? No? Oh, good. There's always some. And there are some things that I like about it, but it tends to be, if you could reduce it to a single phrase, it would be women are from Venus, men are from hell. There are very few, most of the males, not all, but almost all of them are villains, and the women not. And it paints it's just a very, very grim view. It makes a woman's body look like just a site where crimes are committed, rather than you wouldn't know that women had any happiness or pleasure or tenderness with a man. It's so harsh. And Eve Ensler gave a series of lectures in which she called Afghan is everywhere. And here's a typical gender feminist quote. She said, I think that the oppression of women is universal. We are bonded in every single place in the world. I think the conditions are exactly the same. That was her emphasis, exactly. This is systematic global oppression of women is a complete across the globe. Now, as an equity feminist, I find that shocking. I do not think of American women as part of a systemic system of oppression. And again, I hasten to say there are still problems. heaven knows there are still problems, and I listed some of them. But men face there probably an equal number of problems, but talk about that in a minute. What we see is that, so the way that I see it is that equity feminism is a great American success story, and that we are not part of this global system of oppression, that in fact we have probably gone beyond the aspirations and dreams of our feminist foremothers. Now, what exactly is wrong with gender feminism? Why do I take such exception to it? I would say that it suffers from three flaws. First of all, it is, and I will try to show this, very reckless with statistics, with the truth. Secondly, it rests on the dogmatic attachment to the view that the sexes are essentially the same, or to this idea of that gender is socially constructed. And third, I think it places too little focus on genuine oppression on women in the developing world. I could add a fourth, which is also, there's too much male bashing, but given the constraints of time, I will focus on the misinformation, the dogmatic attachment to the view that the sexes are the same, and inattention, too little attention, to women in the third world. Pick up any women, I want to say, this seems like an overstatement, but I will say pick up any women's studies textbook, because I've never seen any women's studies textbook that is an exception to what I'm about to say, or visit a college women's center, or look at a syllabus of a typical sort of intro women's studies class. You're likely to find a lot of elaborate theories about I would say conspiracy theories about the male hegemony, about the patriarchy. American college women, as I've said, are among the freest and most fortunate in the world, but in Women's Studies 101, they are taught that they inhabit an oppressive society where women are conditioned to subordination, routinely battered and raped by men, channeled into low-paying jobs, cheated out of almost a quarter of their due income, and that's only if they're not already dead from eating disorders caused by desperate efforts to meet patriarchal standards of beauty. Now, in their eye-opening book, Professing Feminism, Education and Indoctrination in Women's Studies, two women's studies professors, pioneers in the field, Daphne Pattaya and Noretta Kortka, they describe, quote, the sea of propaganda that overwhelms the contemporary women's studies classroom. And I'm going to give some examples in a second. They show how idealistic female students will come into their class, not their class, but the typical women's studies class, and maybe their class in the past, because they have given up using these texts and using these statistics. They say it turns these idealistic young women into relentless grievance collectors. The historian Christine Rosen published an analysis of 5 leading women's studies textbooks. She did a content analysis for the Independent Women's Forum a few years ago, and she found them full of falsehoods, half-truths, and, as she put it, deliberately misleading sisterly sophistries. In all the texts she reviewed, she said traditional marriage, stay-at-home mothers, the culture of romance was under fire. Domesticity was ridiculed, even savaged. Now, this is a very important point, and I have to make it right now. There are serious, fantastically good scholars working in women's studies. Most departments include a fair share of solid, straightforward scholars who study the history of women in the Middle Ages or women's psychology, and there I have not only do I have no problem with them, I depend on them. I'm writing a book now on the history of conservative feminism, and it's these wonderful women scholars like at UCLA who've opened my eyes to a whole history, a hidden, a submerged, a lost continent of conservative feminism. So there are serious scholars, and I apologize in advance when I say women's studies and suggest that these serious scholars are doing anything wrong. They're not. They're doing everything right. However, most women's studies departments also, they have their serious scholars, but they also have sort of ideologically inflamed, statistically challenged hardliners. and they often set the tone. And these include a variety. They're not all the same. There's some hardline egalitarians still in the thrall to sort of 1970s unisex feminism. They think that if only we'd give girls trucks and boys dolls, so we would have a gender-neutral society. It's never happened. Human nature keeps getting in the way, but they will not give up on it. There are also difference feminists who follow people like Carol Gilligan, and I call it difference feminism, but it's actually superiority feminism because they do say that sexes are different, but that women are better. So you're allowed to say different but better. I, as an equity feminist, believe in different but equal. And then there are a variety of, just a dizzying number of Marxists or post-colonialists, eco-feminists, Freudian separatists, goddess-worshipping, I mean, all kinds of things. Now, except for the serious scholars that I mentioned, all the other groups are very hungry for data that depicts American society as ruinous for women. And over the years, I have looked carefully at feminist claims about women and violence, depression, eating disorders, pay equity, education. What I have found is that most of the materials, not all, but most of the victim statistics that you find in the women's studies canon, in the fact sheets, in the literature, on the websites, are misleading, confused, or I don't want to say deliberately inaccurate, but maybe, I don't know. I can't believe it would be deliberate, but just false, plain false. Now, just to give you a facetious example and then some serious ones, you may have heard some years back, in fact, when I was writing Who Stole Feminism, it was all over the news that on Super Bowl Sunday, battery against women increases 40%. And NBC, during the Super Bowl Classic, I don't know, 93 or 94, ran a public service announcement urging men to remain calm during the game. And it turned out that there was a wonderful reporter at the Washington Post named Ken Ringel who did something almost unheard of when it comes to a feminist victim statistic. I still can't believe he did it. He checked the facts. He tried to find the source. It took him about an hour to find out that it was a hoax or something, not a hoax because that implies it was delivered. It wasn't delivered, but somebody misquoted someone. It got into the feminist echo chamber. It got into the media. And once these fictoids are out there, one statistician says they're harder to kill than a vampire. Once a false statistic, we'll get to the wage gap in a minute because that's the mother of all vampire statistics. Over the years, I have looked at these claims, and just a few quick examples. Consider the highly praised Penguin Atlas of Women in the World. And this is in addition to Women's Studies textbook. This is an atlas. It was edited by Joan Seeger, a chair of Hunter College Geography Department and a feminist scholar. The atlas was named Reference Book of the Year by the American Library Association when it was first published. It's now in its 4th edition, I think. Nobody should be without this book, says Gloria Steinem. A wealth of fascinating information, according to the Washington Post. Fascinating, yes. But the information is skewed, and if not flat out false. 2 quick examples. In this atlas, you find a color-coded map which shows how women are being kept in their place by restrictions on mobility, dress, and behavior. And on this, it turns out that the United States is ranked along with Somalia, Uganda, Yemen, Niger, and Libya. All are coded with the same shade of green, which indicate places where, quote, patriarchal assumptions operate in potent combination with fundamentalist religious interpretations. So the United States and Uganda, women are kept in their place. Now, what was her logic? Well, she explains. So the editor of this Penguin Atlas says, in Uganda, a man can claim an unmarried woman as his wife by raping her. Well, I would say that's barbaric and oppressive, and yes, let's put it there as a place where women are kept in their place. And in the United States, we get the same low rating because, she says, quote, state legislatures enacted 301 anti-abortion measures between 1995 and 2001. if she updated it, she'd find even more, as we know. Now, never mind that what's going on in Uganda, as I said, is so barbaric, it defies belief. The U.S. abortion laws are, first of all, the basic law on abortion in the United States is that maybe the most liberal in the world. And what's going on with all this activism and controversy? What I see is a sign of a free and open democracy working out its disagreements. And if you look at the data from, again, the Gallup poll, you find that Americans are very divided on abortion, including American women. 51% of women believe it's morally wrong. Now, it's not that people think it should be banned. People think that it's morally wrong, but as many as 60% of women believe that there should be some restrictions, or many restrictions. So what I find very interesting is I am a proponent or a believer in the gay rights movement. I think that it started out very controversial, and what you see, it's moving, and the society is changing. And from the most surprising places, you're beginning to find people, conservatives as well, starting to open their eyes and see this may be an authentic civil rights movement. And the statistics just show with younger people, far more acceptance. With abortion, it's different. With abortion, over the years, fewer people are supporting it. There's more, especially now with the new technology and the sonograms and so forth, there's more confusion. So I think it's not the same kind of issue. It's an issue where, so to count all of this activism around it and efforts to control it as a war on women's bodies is to fail to see the complexity of the dilemma. It's a genuine moral dilemma, and we are divided, women and men. One more map in this atlas gives the United States the same rating for domestic violence as Uganda and Haiti. And Seeger, the editor, supports the claim, and then she cites a statistic, which I don't. This again, that might be an exaggeration, but I think I've never seen a women's studies textbook that didn't have some version of it. It says, quote, 25 to 35% of women who visit hospital emergency rooms are there because of domestic violence. Now, the actual figure is fewer than 1%. I actually sent a note to a statistician at the Centers for Disease Control, and she put it at fewer than 1/10 of 1%. The Justice Department, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, they don't find this. And think about it, if you've ever been into an emergency room. Do you think that 1 of 3 women there was beaten up by her husband or boyfriend? Is that why they're there? I mean, it's absurd, but it's in all the textbooks. It can't be corrected. And I even pointed it out to a textbook author that she had mistakes. Nancy Lemon at Berkeley, she edits the leading domestic violence textbooks in law, used in law schools. It was full of these kinds of fictoids. And it went into its, I guess, 3rd or 4th edition, and she didn't correct it. It was appalling to me. But anyway, now look, reasonable people can disagree about statistical findings, and I don't want to get bogged down with that, but what I will tell you is that women's studies textbooks and fact sheets really aren't interested in debate. It's not as if the textbook will say, well, some people say this and some say that, and here's what strength. No, they report. They find the most lurid, incendiary statistics, and those are reported. They can be counted on to ignore studies that show low rates of victimization or low rates of injustice for American women, no matter how rigorous or fair-minded the study may be. And they can be counted on just the same to embrace those that show high levels of victimization or injustice, no matter how bogus the study may be. Now, you may say, look, there are lots of textbooks. All books have mistakes. There are bound to be some errors. Folks, I'm not talking about a few errors. I am talking about a body of false information that is at the heart of the modern women's movement. Egregiously false information, which appears to be immune to correction. And then when you try to correct it, people think you're insensitive to the problem. I'm not insensitive to the problem of domestic violence. I think it's so heinous, it drives me mad. to encounter it and see evidence of it. And it's because it's so serious and hateful that I think those women deserve good research, solid information, not hype, hysteria, hyperbole, Super Bowl hoaxes, and the like. Now, I can imagine someone protesting at this point that, okay, you found some false statistics. Maybe there are a lot of them. Maybe we'll all agree they should be corrected. And yes, there may be some eccentric feminists who say odd things now and again in their classroom. But what about all the accurate statistics showing that women are far from equal to men? What about the fact that women earn 76 cents for every dollar a man earns? That's not a false stat. What about the fact that women are only 17%, they have only, I forget what it is now, 16 or 17% of the seats in the House and the Senate? Isn't it true that women are vastly underrepresented in the high echelons of business and science and technology? How can you deny the fact that women in the United States continue to face serious, systemic, ongoing sexist discrimination? Well, I do deny it. It's not my view that these statistics aren't accurate. Where I disagree with my feminist colleagues is the explanation. Even feminist economists will agree that that wage gap, women 76 cents on the dollar, is misleading. That the real reason for the disparity is not because evil employers are just deliberately cheating their female employees out of a quarter of their salary. As I said, there are very few feminist economists who will say that anymore. Because all that figure, the 76-cent figure on the dollar, all that is you take all the women in the country and all the men who are working full-time, and you just give the average of what their income is. And that doesn't take into account critical factors. You have to put in controls. For example, we need to know, what did they major in college? What fields do they work in? How many hours a week does this person work? And how many years have they been in the workplace, continuous years? Once you make all those adjustments, let's just make one. The Department of Labor does a time use survey, and they looked at full-time women and full-time men. They found that the average woman working full-time works 8 hours per day on the job. For men, it's 8.79 hours. Now, why? So it looks like men might work about 9%, or women would work 9% less than men on average. Well, that would account for about a third of the pay gap right there. But now let's go look at what fields what occupations. And women are much more likely to go into fields like teaching, the caring professions, the helping professions. They find it interesting when they get to college. What do you want to major in? I could come and tell you, you could double your salary if you became a petroleum engineer. And a lot of women will say, well, but I want to be a psychologist, or I want to be a lawyer, I want to be, they do not, you just find, the pool of people who want to be petroleum engineers, there are far more men than women who find it interesting. So anyway, when you factor these things in, what happens? And in fact, in January of 2009, the Labor Department posted a study prepared by CONSAD Research Corporation. The CONSAD Research Corporation is where you go if you want no nonsense, absolute, accurate information. It's run by, I called there to speak to some of the statisticians and sort of Asperger-like person on the phone, had all this data. And you go there if you really want no nonsense. Well, they studied the wage gap. They were commissioned to do it. And every department in the government uses CONSAD when they really need accurate data. A whole country, of Holland, if they want to save their canal system or something, you go to CONSAD. Well, what did CONSAD find? You can find this on the web. It's called An Analysis of the Reasons for Disparity in Wages Between Men and Women. It looked at 50 peer-reviewed studies. It scanned the literature exhaustively and concluded that the wage gap could be fully accounted for by extraneous factors other than discrimination. I think they found in one of maybe 5% they couldn't fully explain, but they could not attribute it to discrimination. So there could be a 5-cent gap we still have to worry about, but on the other hand, they suggested that using the 26%, that women are earning 26 cents for every dollar a man earns is outright false. It's also true that women and men make different choices. Not only are they making different choices in what field they go into, and on average, but they divide their time between home and work differently. The Pew Research Center did a survey, and they said, quote, of working parents. They said a strong majority of working mothers, 62%, say they would prefer to work part-time. An overwhelming majority of working fathers, 79%, prefer full-time. Only 1 in 5 say they would want to work part-time, except that my son's good friend Elliot wants to be a stay-at-home husband with no kids. So they didn't they didn't poll him. Anyway, to close the wage gap, women's groups are going to have to find a way to change women's preferences, life choices. Now, there are going to be some feminists who will say, but women, wait a minute, women's choices are the result of cultural conditioning and indoctrination. And the reason women stay home with kids is because they were brought up with those baby dolls, and they were told to be girly girls and discouraged from becoming petroleum engineers. And we want a world where, you know, we tried it. We've tried to get the girls to play with the trucks and the boys with the dolls, and the children rebel. Now, I hasten to say there are exceptions, and they're probably in this room. There's a female petroleum engineer. Because every time I use an example, there's somebody in the room that turns out to be that person. As many as 20% of women will defy the stereotypes, or 20% of men, and that's why we need equity feminism, because we want women to have that opportunity. In the bad old days, what was wrong before feminism came along is that all women were subject to this, what many experienced as a stultifying rigidity and conformity. So what I love about equity feminism is we believe the sexes are different but equal, but we allow that not all women are going to be different, and we want them to have opportunities. If they want to be the race car driver, or they want to go into, I even believe in combat, if they can do it and want to do it. I mean, most women are not going to want to do that, but those that do, I think we give them the opportunity. We'll all be the better for it. So there's still room for equity feminism in a society that acknowledges differences. Just checking on my time here. Ooh, I got to start finishing up. I'm going to do this shorthand, but I'll go into it if you want more details in the discussion. In some campuses I go to, the young women say, well, you're really talking about feminism 10, 15 years ago. It's changed. It's more moderate. It's more reasonable on campus. I don't see evidence of it. I will take their word for it that there's this new moderation. I haven't seen the articles. I haven't seen the books, but let's assume that that's coming. I hope so. But I don't see it in Washington. In Washington, there is a women's lobby that's working night and day, that is still completely fixated on this idea that women are a subordinate class, and all disparities, any statistical distinction between men and women can only be explained by discrimination. And every week they have lawyers, there are 112 organizations in a group called the National Council for Research on Women. These aren't small organizations. These are huge, like the AAUW, the National Women's Law Center, the Wellesley Center for Research on Women. They're working night and day. This is not all of them, because some of them are, I meet them, they're nice. You meet people and you like them. Someone told me, don't meet people you criticize because you might like them. And I just met a bunch of women from the Wellesley Center who were very nice, but they are ideological. And they see discrimination, and they have a boilerplate explanation for all disparities. And now, because long ago, fortunately, we outlawed overt discrimination. Now they've come up with elaborate theories about unconscious bias and invisible barriers and so forth. And these groups are promoting laws. They're fundamentally changing our society in ways which are detrimental. And my final point is that we could, if conservative women and moderate women and libertarian women, if we were invited to the table, if we had a place in the women's movement, we could introduce some reality checks. We could help correct the misinformation. We could draw attention. I don't want to say that the women's movement is not looking at women in the developing world, because one thing I want to say is, of all people, Eve Ensler, who sounds twisted when she says American women, or it just continues with what's going on in the developing world. She's doing fantastic work in the Congo. She's a very brave woman, in many ways heroic. So I do find things to admire in what's going on with the gender feminists. But if they would make common cause with conservative women, there are religious Catholic women, evangelical women, and I don't have time to go into the whole history, but this is a fact. American women all over the world, have made the most progress when conservative and progressive women make common cause. When that happens, that's a long story, but that's how we got the vote. And even in the beginning of the second wave feminism, you had as many Republicans, if not more, Democrats, pushing for equity. That's all broken down. Now it's a one-party system. They're not going to be able to do it on their own. Last point, feminization of poverty and too much domestic violence and so forth. I completely agree that the women's groups exaggerate it, but even if you don't exaggerate it, it's a horrible, hateful problem, the domestic violence. But as a moderate woman or someone who's not warring with the society, I would have to tell you that the best protection that you can offer a woman from poverty and from violence is an intact family. As some pundit put it, the best agency for health, education, and welfare is a husband. Now, it's not foolproof, all right? There are husbands that misbehave horribly and cannot be tolerated. But overall, there's no government program in the world. A friend of mine, Lionel Tagle, calls it a bureaugamy, that as if women should be married to the state. The state is not going to be a good husband. There's nothing. But so why we must, if you want to, and poverty is a woman having a child. Now, if you're upper middle class and you have a child, you're rich, you're Angelina Jolie, and so you don't get married, that's fine. But you're setting a standard, you're setting an example that could be devastating for poor women. And this is a dramatic finding, and I urge you to read a book by my colleague Charles Murray about what's happened just with the white working class, where they used to have marriage patterns. If you go back to the 1960s, they were hardly distinguishable from the upper middle class. All the children, almost all, 84%, had the benefit of intact families. That's fallen apart for the white working class, not for the white upper class and upper middle class. They still have, most of those children, 84%, it hasn't really changed, are raised by a mother and father. So a lot of the theories have had terrible impact on the working class. So my advice today to today's young women is to take back feminism, reform it, correct the excess, correct the misinformation, no pun intended, make it family-friendly, husband-friendly, insist that moderate and conservative women be given a voice at the table, and then set about writing the next great chapter in the history of women's quest for freedom, and that's helping women in the developing world. And just to say, this portion of the ovular is over. I will now take questions, should there be any. Thank you. Oh, that was 44 minutes, sorry. 4 minutes over. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, where to begin? First, just I talked before about the complementarity of the sexes, and if you see, children need a mother and a father, and if you go to a playground, typically two parents are there. The mother will say, the little kid's climbing a structure, and the mother will say, "Be careful." The father will say, "Can you get to the top?" We need both those people. And as I said, I'm tolerant of gay marriage, and most of the marriages usually that I'm aware of. I have a few friends who have, and there's a mother and a father. They seem to take on those roles. Two parents, and a single mother unless you're very wealthy, and my sister was a single mother. She wasn't wealthy, but my parents were there to kind of back her up entirely. But if you don't have that, I mean, there's no government program in the world. I don't know what you could possibly imagine. And why? Why would we want to replace something that worked so well? And I watched it. We watched it go down. If you talk about domestic violence, it greatly increases a woman's chance of being a victim of violence if it's a live-in boyfriend than a husband. Greatly increases a child's chance of being abused or witnessing violence in an unstable family environment. Again, nothing is perfect in this world. There's no guarantee. But for all of history that we're aware of until about a few decades ago, it was taken for granted that children needed a secure, balanced family. And the reason I tell you to take a look at Charles Murray's book is what he's discovered is that for educated upper middle class women today, they have that. If you go, he compared two communities, Belmont, upper middle class, and then a poor community in Pennsylvania. The upper middle class people, they may be preaching, single families are just single parent families, but their marriage rates are they look like the 1950s. And he says they should preach what they practice. But they don't. What we have is a cognitive elite, Charles calls them, who have been teaching in our schools that, marriage, we should just replace it with a bureogamy, some other system. If it worked, that would be one thing, but there's no amount of money in the world that could replace a system. I mean, a father is I just think it's a national sort of an epidemic of fatherlessness. Not that single mothers can't make adjustments, and as I told you, my sister did, and the more middle class you are, the better you're off you're going to be. But for poor women, your chances of getting poorer and your children to be exposed to every kind of danger just grow exponentially. Next, yes? Yes. Oh boy. Okay. They have something called Fulfilling the Potential of Women in Science and Engineering Act. And this is all based on what I consider to be the worst kind of advocacy research, because if you go into the universities and look, first of all, women are graduating in far greater numbers. It's true they don't major in the same things that guys do. There are a lot. One of the most popular majors for women is education. And for guys, it's engineering. And it really hasn't changed. So many things have changed in American society. And women have become just, ambitious, and women, just like men, they want to, most women, according to the Pew Research, want to have a career, but then they want to balance it differently with home and life. But women want more than they ever did. But they do not want to be engineers. And they do want to be biologists. So that field is all but becoming feminized. Veterinary medicine, it used to be males, now it's almost all women. Women love that field. So what's wrong with this bill? It's going to encourage science departments to, and they are already doing it, and I've shown this, I don't like it when speakers read my article, but I did write an article showing quite, I think, carefully documented that they're already using quotas. At Cornell, for example, they have goals, they call them. It'd be much easier to be hired as a female than a male. And I talked to a chairman of a department at MIT, and he said, look, I want the best team I can get. I don't care if it's a man or woman. I just want the best person, because we're competing at a world level. It's like an Olympic team. But he says, but if I go to my dean, if there's a genius at Columbia that I want to recruit to MIT, and it's a guy, I won't be able to get him. But if it's a female, I got him in a second. Or even somebody that's less talented, he would have in a second. So I think that is very destructive. I mean, America leads the world. We have led the world. That's what drives the prosperity. Is math and physics and information technology. And yes, there are more men in those fields. The women that are in those fields and want to be there do brilliantly, but there are more men. The pool of people that want to do that. and then I wonder, like, why do we have a bill to fulfill the potential of women in engineering and not a bill to fulfill the potential of men in art history, where it's almost all female majors, or fulfill the potential of men in education, where we really do need male teachers because that might help the boys who are languishing in school. Overall, I'm just against all this micromanaging, and this bill also, all of the bills, there's another one, the Paycheck Fairness Act, they all provide for workshops. So they're going to be gender apparatchiks in Washington, these same lobbying groups having workshops disseminating their advocacy research. But I think it's a real problem. And there's one other thing I'll add. If you are an academic and you come out with a paper objecting to these bills or objecting to the research that supports the bill, you're an academic and you do a study that shows it's career diminishing. It could be career annihilating. I mean, look at someone like Larry Summers, who was president of Harvard, and he dared to suggest, I won't go into that story, but anyway, he ended up, it was part of the reason a big reason why he lost his job at Harvard. So imagine any man, if you're thinking of showing what we know is true, is that at the very, very high end of the ability distribution, people with freakishly high IQs, you have more men than women. It's not that there aren't women there. There are the female geniuses. Don't ever forget that. And the average IQ of men and women is about the same, no difference, because men are also represented at the other extreme. More male geniuses, more male anti-geniuses, if you will, or Nobels and dumbbells, someone once said, but I didn't say that. Yes? Right. I don't disagree with you. I think that conservatives, right now there's such a divide. Conservatives just never hear what goes on. And when you tell them about anything that's going on in women's studies, they just don't take it seriously at all. And believe me, that bothers me. And I think there's also sexism in some conservative organizations, which my conservative friends, females that I know, would agree with me. But about the single mother thing, I tried to make it clear that my sister raised her kids on her own, but she would be the first to tell you it was not easy, and that this has become, and of course we have to be respectful and understanding and supportive, but this has become a norm, and you have a whole generation of young women, not upper middle class women. Upper middle class women, they expect to have a husband, and they're choosing careers they can go in and out of, and they're going to have the romantic wedding. But a lot of working class women now think that they're going to have to do it on their own, because they're just not finding the guys they're going to marry. And again, for reasons, boys are doing so poorly in school, so they're not making it. Vast numbers of guys are not making it in an information economy. They used to depend on jobs in construction and manufacturing, and they could get into them somehow, make it into the middle class. You could realize the American dream 20 years ago, but that has all changed. You can't realize the American dream without some post-high school education, and girls are getting it and guys are not. And so that means that what's happened, I think, is that working class women and increasingly middle class women are just settling for the idea that you can't depend on a male. And I'm thinking part of my idea is that I think marriage has a civilizing influence on men. I think it's a critical social institution. I think women are harmed. So all I'm telling you is to consider the possibility of trying to strengthen this organization, this institution, instead of writing against it, and even though that's going to hurt women. Now, about the point that, again, that we could learn, there's something psychologists call confirmation bias, which is we're all biased in favor of what we already believe. And so if you read an article that supports what you believe, you just lap it up, you love it, and I do that. But as a philosopher, I try to be careful, because I know that there is this powerful inclination to believe what you already believe, especially if it's something you feel passionate about. And if you read something that shows you're wrong, there's a strong tendency to reject it. And so and that's why we need, and in most university departments, I don't know, maybe not all, but in many, in philosophy, we had a balance. And if someone was holding a strong position, you know, metaphysical position against free will, there are other philosophers who were there to challenge that person, and we meet at the APA, we're constantly fighting, and there's quality control called criticism. I feel that's broken down in women's studies because of the absence of dissidents and skeptics. So I'm not disagreeing. I think we could all benefit from direct encounter with people with whom you disagree. That's why I want more intellectual diversity in our law schools and on our campuses, and that's why I'm a great fan of the Federalist Society and urge you to come to their lectures. Yes? Okay, thank you for coming.